Welcome back to State of the Union. My next guest is trying to light a fire under the Democratic Party as they look to counter President Trump. Here with me now is Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. Thank you so much for being here.
Sure.
What's your reaction to what you just heard from the president's national security advisor? Do you think there's hope of salvaging this relationship with Ukraine?
So it is absolutely shameful what is happening right now. The White House has become an arm of the Kremlin. Every single day you hear from the national security advisor, from the president of the United States, from his entire national security team, Kremlin talking points. For the last week, the White House has been pretending as if Ukraine started this war. That's essentially saying that Poland invaded Germany at the beginning of World War II. There are still facts in this world. And the fact is this: Vladimir Putin is a brutal dictator. Russia started this war. And the entire pretext for that meeting yesterday was an attempt to rewrite history in order to sign a deal with Putin that hands Putin Ukraine. That is disastrous for U.S. national security. That means that China will be on the march. Putin may not stop. America may be at war with a nuclear power. And for what? For what? It appears as if America is trying to align itself with dictators, that Donald Trump wants us to have our closest relationships with despots all around the world, because that makes it easier for him to transition America into a kleptocratic oligarchy where Elon Musk and Donald Trump rule and steal from the American people. If we were allied with democracies, that would be harder. But if the United States' closest partner is Russia, then it makes it a lot easier for Donald Trump, Elon, and their billionaire pals to steal from the American people, to steal our data, to steal our Medicare, to steal our Medicaid in order to enrich themselves.
There was a lot there. Let me just go back to the notion of trying to end the war. Is there a way to do that without negotiating with Vladimir Putin?
Listen, I have no problem with a diplomatic solution. What Zelensky asked, I thought very understandably in the White House, was a simple question. How are you going to trust Vladimir Putin when he has sat down at the negotiating table multiple times before and never honored the agreement? What Trump is suggesting is that there is going to be a ceasefire that will require Ukraine to withdraw from the front, which then allows Putin to just march straight into Ukraine. So all Zelensky asked yesterday was, how do you know that diplomacy will work? And because he had the audacity to ask that simple question, he was ushered out of the White House. Contracts were canceled to support Ukraine's electricity grid. And apparently the United States is going to do Putin's bidding and hand him Ukraine potentially without a negotiation now.
You were part of a bipartisan group of senators who met with President Zelensky right before that Oval Office. One of the other senators there was Senator Lindsey Graham. I want you to listen to what he said right after the Oval Office meeting.
I have never been more proud of the president. I was very proud of J.D. Vance standing up for our country. We want to be helpful. What I saw in the Oval Office was disrespectful, and I don't know if we can ever do business with Zelensky again. He either needs to resign and send somebody over that we can do business with, or he needs to change.
A couple things. One is I want you to react to that, but also Senator Graham said that he was trying to help Zelensky before he went to the Oval Office, coaching him what to say, what not to say. Were you part of those conversations?
Well, I can't speak to every conversation that Senator Graham had, but yes, I met with President Zelensky that morning, and President Zelensky was ready to sign that minerals agreement, no matter how insufficient it was, but had an obligation to have a conversation with the President of the United States about the disaster that would be wrought for Ukraine if they signed an agreement that didn't have Zelensky at the table and trusted Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin is not to be trusted. And so Zelensky had an obligation to raise that issue. And Vance seized on that moment to start a litany of Russia-baked talking points about how weak the Ukrainian army was, about how corrupt the nation is, The back half of that meeting ended up just being the Kremlin literally driving the message of the White House. It is a sad day in America when we are getting closer and closer to Russia, a brutal dictatorship, and we are getting further and further away from democratic allies. Nobody in America wants that. People in America want that war to end, but they don't want it to end by handing the entirety of Ukraine to Russia and elevating the power of a dictator in the Kremlin.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio was there. He didn't participate in the conversation, but he was with the National Security Advisor when they asked Zelensky to leave the White House after that blow-up. And he has been very supportive of what happened in that meeting. You voted to approve his nomination to be Secretary of State. You still think you made the right choice?
Nope, it was a mistake. It was a mistake. I think a lot of us thought that Marco Rubio was going to stand up to Donald Trump on an issue like this, that when Donald Trump decided to align America with dictatorships, again, in order to make it easier for him to steal from the American people, to turn America into an illiberal democracy in which, just like Russia, the oligarchs, the economically powerful people in America rule and the rest of us just feed the powerful. I thought when Donald Trump decided to do that, when Donald Trump would come to him and say, help me move America closer to Russia and to Russian values, Marco Rubio would stand up to him. Marco Rubio has not, and that's been a great disappointment to many of his former colleagues in the Senate.
You have been trying to lead your party, lead your colleagues in being aggressive and pushing back, as we've heard a lot this morning, against Donald Trump. You're skipping his joint address to Congress on Tuesday. You believe other Democrats, House and Senate Democrats, should do the same, and why?
Oh, I think every Democrat needs to make up their own mind. I think that State of the Union speech is going to be a farce. I think it's going to be a MAGA pep rally, not a serious talk to the nation. I think Donald Trump is going to spew a series of lies about his alignment with Russia, about what he's trying to do to allow Elon Musk to essentially monetize the American government to enrich Musk and his billionaire crowd. And I'm just not going to be a part of that. Listen, the case I'm making to Democrats is that we have to fight every single day. Every single day. Republicans flood the zone. Democrats have to flood the zone. They flood the zone with lies. We flood the zone with truth. We are going to stop this billionaire takeover of government. We are going to stop their destruction of democracy, which they have to do because what they are attempting to do, gut Medicaid in order to feed another set of tax cuts to Elon Musk and his billionaire friends, it's unpopular. We're going to stop that billionaire takeover, that destruction of our democracy, only by fighting them every single day. A lot of Democrats think maybe you should fight every third day, you should reserve your power and jump out of the bushes at the right moment. I just think that we have to be on the offensive 24/7.
Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nice to see you in person. And President Trump did cede the stage this week to two top advisors. Is one of them his heir apparent? My panel